Welcome into another episode of Silent to Courtside. My name is Zach, and today for you I have a full preview of the NBA Play-In Tournament. The tournament is officially set now with the regular season coming to an end earlier today. And so in the East, we have the 76ers, the Magic, the Hornets, and the Heat. And then out West, you have the Trailblazers, the Suns, the Clippers, and the Warriors. So starting in the East with the 7-8 matchup between the Philadelphia 76ers and the Orlando Magic. This game will be Wednesday at 7:30. This game will be in Philadelphia since the Magic lost yesterday to the Boston Celtics. And a pretty shocking result as the Celtics pretty much whole team was out. No Tatum, no Brown, White. Their whole top 8 players, I believe it was, were all sitting. And the Magic went out there and completely no-showed. It was one of the more surprising results of this whole season, to be honest. The Magic at full health with plenty to play for still really laid an egg when they needed it most. And yesterday, the 76ers went out and they dominated the Bucks, and then that's really what this Magic game should have looked like against the Boston Celtics, but this didn't happen. Magic have been pretty disappointing all season. This is a team that many thought were going to be, a top 4 or 5 seed in the East, with a lot of those stars being out, Tatum being out, Tyrese Halliburton not playing at all this year. And so the East looked pretty wide open, and it looked ripe for the taking for a team like the Magic, young team with a good core with Paul Bencaro, Franz Wagner. They traded all those picks for Desmond Bane last summer, and it was really, really disappointing season from start to finish for the Magic. But they can still make it to the playoffs. They just have to win one of these next 2 games, whether that be against the 76ers or against the winner of that Hornets Heat game on Tuesday. And so I think this is a game that's just going to come down to, who gets to play their style. The Magic are, a big physical team. They like, really get in the paint and make you work for your buckets. And the Sixers like to push it. They've, Tyrese Maxey's fifth in the league in scoring. You know, really, really came on strong this year. Joel Embiid, when healthy, is one of the best players in the league. And even Paul George, when playing, he's only played 36 games this season, but averaged over 17 points in those 36 games. Obviously, had the suspension with the PEDs, but he's been back for a couple games now, and he's looked good. So we'll have to see how that core plays. Obviously, the young VJ Edgecombe also looks to be a future star in this league. And so, given that, I think, the Magic really look kind of ice cold right now. Sixers look good. I'm going to go with the Philadelphia 76ers to get the win at home Wednesday night, and they will go ahead and face Boston in the first round. Game 1 will be at 1 o'clock on Sunday. So moving on to the 9-10 game, this game will be at 7:30 on Tuesday. It is between the Miami Heat and the Charlotte Hornets. This game will be in Charlotte, Charlotte being the 9 seed. Now, very, very young team led by LaMelo Ball, Rookie of the Year candidate Colin Knippel, Brandon Miller. Really, really fast-paced team. They love to push it, love to shoot the ball. Jaylen Brown said that they remind him of those young Celtics teams when Tatum and Brown were young, and they just shoot you out of the gym. And that's kind of what this Hornets team is they've lived and died by the three, for better for worse, and that got them in some trouble early in the year. Really caught fire, mid to late season. Played themselves into this playing tournament, where I think they can do some real damage here. I think they get out of this playing tournament, they could make a run. And it's unfortunate they ended with the ninth seed, and didn't get a little bit higher. They were close, at the end of the year. If they could have, beat the Celtics on Thursday, they could have gotten, maybe up to that sixth seed where I think they really could do some damage. I think the Knicks are a little vulnerable. I'll talk more about that later this week when I preview the full NBA playoffs. On to the Heat side of things. Obviously, Norman Powell, his first time All-Star this year, had a great year. Much better than I think many people expected. Tyler Hero, didn't play a lot, only played 32 games, although averaged 21 points per game in those 32 games. Bam obviously had that huge 83-point game against the Wizards about a month ago. This team doesn't really blow me away. They're not really elite at anything. They have a solid core. That, like I said, Norman Powell, Tyler Hero, Bam Adebayo. Khalil Ware's a guy I really like. Young player, center, average 11. David Mitchell, another younger guy that I really like, but I just don't think it's really gonna be enough. The Hornets are pretty hot. I'm gonna go with the Hornets to beat the Heat at home, and they will face the Orlando Magic for that last spot, that eighth seed in the East. So in that 8-9 game for the last spot in the playoffs, I really like this Hornets team. Really young core, high power offense. Can give them some trouble sometimes. Like I said, the shooting. When it's on, they are on. But when they're off, they're off. Colin Knippel is one of the best shooters in the league, if not the best shooter in the league, as a rookie, which is just unheard of. Very well could end up winning Rookie of the Year. That hot contested debate with his college teammate Cooper Flag. And the Magic really struggling right now. I said they laid an egg yesterday. Paulo Banchero had a triple double on Sunday. It was a losing effort, but he still played pretty well. I I just don't trust the Magic. They're a bad shooting team. Really across the board. Jalen Suggs had a good performance. He hit 5 threes on Sunday against the Celtics, but I can't trust this team really. And the Hornets, young team, you could have trouble trusting them as well. But I think they get the job done in Orlando on Friday, and they will face on the Detroit Pistons in the first round. So moving over to the West, the 7-8 game is between the Suns and the Trailblazers. That game will be at 10 o'clock on Tuesday. In Phoenix, Suns being the 7th seed, and Devin Booker still being the clear leader of this team. Has been for a while. Obviously, they had Kevin Durant, first season without Kevin Durant. They really outplayed expectations pretty much from everybody. I don't think many people saw them being, a high playing team, nearly a playoff, like a full time playoff team. They had the home court here. Devin Booker, 26 points per game. Dylan Brooks had a career year. Jalen Green played pretty well, 18 points. Only played 32 games. Dealt with some injuries throughout the year. Came over in that Kevin Durant trade with the Rockets. And, the team as a whole just outplayed expectations. Very similar to the Blazers. Danny Avdija, first career All-Star appearance this year, averaged over 24 points a game. Played great throughout the whole season, really. People will make comments about the free throws and, his whistle. I don't really buy into a ton of that. Obviously, it's prevalent, but I think that's just part of the game nowadays, and that's just something you kind of have to accept. Drew Holiday being the older guy, that starting point guard, the locker room guy, the leader of the team, through that way. Donovan Clingan is a guy I really like, one of the more underrated centers in the league, averaging a double double. His second year out of UConn, great player. I think he's on track to eventually be an All Star one day later down the line. But this is a game where I think the experience of some of the older guys on the Suns, Devin Booker, Dylan Brooks, even Jalen Green, has been there. Grayson Allen, they've all been on playoff teams that have gone, pretty deep in the playoffs. So I think that will help, the Blazers. Drew Holiday really being the only guy there that has, been there, done that in the playoffs. So I'm going to go with the Phoenix Suns to advance and play the San Antonio Spurs in the first round. Now this is a game which is kind of the opposite between the Clippers and the Warriors, two pretty experienced teams. Clippers obviously led by Kawhi Leonard having one of the best seasons he's had. You know, almost 28 points per game. Really one of the more underrated players this year. Only had to make the All-Star team because of an injury, which I think was crazy. Darius Garland traded for midseason. They shipped off James Harden. He's played very well, almost 26 points per game himself. Brook Lopez, pretty experienced. Bradley Beal, pretty experienced. So yeah, this is very different than the other game with two pretty inexperienced teams. The Warriors, obviously, Steph Curry, Moses Moody, Draymond Green, Al Horford, all very experienced guys. Losing Jimmy Butler early in the year hurt a lot, but they also added Kristaps Porzingis at the trade deadline. So he's another championship-winning player with a ring. So yeah, the Warriors, very up and down seasons. Steph only played 42 games. had dealt with that hamstring for a while, but he's healthy now as the Warriors look to try and make it into the playoffs. However, I don't think they will. I think the Clippers take them down. Clippers really the only reason they're here in this ninth seed to begin with is because of that awful, awful start they got off to. But they got super hot, and I think they stay hot, and I think they move on to the quote unquote second round of this play-in tournament where they will face the Portland Trailblazers on Friday night in Portland. Now, in that game, I think it's kind of a similar story where, Clippers, more experienced team, guys. Kawhi Leonard has been there, done that, won rings, won finals MVPs, all that. Brooke Lopez, been there for forever. Or not been in LA, but been in the league for forever. Darius Garland, multiple playoff runs. And, the Blazers again, really just Drew Holiday. Um, so, yeah, I think that the Clippers, much like the Hornets, and being that ninth seed, they beat both the 10th seed and the 8th seed, and they locked up that 8th seed in the West, and they will go on and face the Oklahoma City Thunder in the first round, which I think could be more interesting than many people would, imagine. As the Clippers, like I said, they got off to a bad start, but they really picked it up. Since the All Star break, really since New Year's, has been one of the better teams in the league. Kawhi Leonard, if he's playing like his full self, who knows what could happen. And so that's all for this play-in tournament preview. Thank you for watching. Be on the lookout. Probably on Saturday morning or Friday night, I will have a full preview of the first round. Once all these playing games are done, we look at those full first round matchups and what those will actually look like. I posted a NFL mock draft just a couple days ago. Check that out if you are interested. I will have another one coming on, I believe, Monday. Just a few days before the full NFL draft takes place. So thank you for watching, everybody. Drop a like, comment, subscribe, and I'll see you on Friday.